Hello and welcome to the Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. Each week, the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in finance take you beyond the numbers and hype, right to the heart of the big issues of the day. This week on the programme, we're continuing with our special season of shows, bringing you more Nobel perspectives, insights from Nobel laureates in the economic sciences, whose vast knowledge helps to inform UBS's approach to answering the big questions that shape our world. Now, we've been fortunate to feature contributions from an array of these talents on the show, and continuing in the coming weeks, we've more fantastic insights from three laureates who, amongst other things, will be reflecting on their own experience in crafting economic knowledge for the real world. We kicked off with David Card, Daron Acemoglu and Bengt Holstrom discussing the current volatile times we live in and how best to navigate such turbulence. This week, this select group of thinkers and practitioners are talking to us about their rich experiences in crafting economic knowledge. We're going to hear from David and Daron once more on this week's edition. We start with Daron Acemoglu. Daron, let's go back to the beginning, if we may. Tell us about the spark that led to your interest in the field.
I became interested in social science as a teenager, precisely because I was fascinated by the interplay of economics and politics. I was coming of age in Turkey, which had recently suffered a military coup and was in the midst of economic turmoil. There was repression, there were soldiers in our school, and I was wondering whether these things were related. And I thought economics would have the answers, that's why I decided to study economics. And little did I know that those weren't questions that people in economics routinely engaged with. That did not dent my interest in the field once I started knowing it, but that remained as a background interest. And then during my PhD, I had the opportunity to start trying to integrate that into economics.
Now, rising to the top of any field requires determination, talent, and no little hard work, of course. What have been the most important ingredients in your quest to master your craft?
Well, you neglected, I think, the most important ingredient, luck. I think success in many fields requires luck. You need to be at the right place at the right time. You need to have the right interests and skills for the questions that are feasible, interesting, and in vogue at the time. So I've been lucky. My interests and my approach could have led to a complete failure, but things have worked out. But I think one thing that helped me was I was genuinely interested in these questions. I was enthusiastic about them. I was passionate about them. And I think that's a very important ingredient as well. You can be cynical. You can say, this is not what I want. I had this organization, I had this topic, I had this focus, but I'll do it just to earn money or to be successful. Yeah, sometimes people can pull that off, but it's not that easy. It's much better and much more satisfying to work on something you're passionate about.
Let's talk about curiosity. What drives you to keep seeking out new areas, new expertise? And I wonder, has it changed over time?
I think every interesting topic, pretty much everything we can get passionate about, has many layers of depth. And curiosity, passion, a real commitment to those topics would propel you to look deeper and deeper. And at different layers, you will encounter surprises and you will need new skills and new expertise. That's another thing that I think distinguishes people who are really committed. You don't stop. Just because you come to a layer that's difficult, that's not one for which the tools you have until now relied upon are sufficient. You may say, okay, let me skirt that. Let me go somewhere else, or let me stop there. Let me repeat what I've done. I think many people in academia are committed enough not to do that. And at that point, you may require new skills and new ways of thinking. You may need to step back several steps and take a different line of attack.
What are some of the biggest challenges in your daily work, and how do you go about overcoming them?
Shortage of time, scarcity of time. If we had more time, because there's so much to learn, so much to do, so much to interact with people, cloning would be great.
Now, your research relates to the need to centre humans and policy decisions. Do you have a view on why the human touch, quote unquote, remains essential to drive innovation?
Yeah, I have a very human-centric approach. I see a lot of the shortcomings and the potential cruelty and callousness of humans from time to time. But humans are also amazing, and I think their creativity is just inspiring. Their commitment to doing new things is really mind-boggling. And if you look at the things that humans have created a little bit more broadly, it's not just science, which is just absolutely awe-inspiring, but also the way that human communities have changed over the last tens of thousands of years, new institutions, new norms, new ways of organizing society. I don't think it's going to be easy for machines, AI, artificial general intelligence, whatever it is, to replicate that. And if that's the case, it provides a very different perspective. We should seek the endless quest to replicate the human mind. Instead, we should seek to understand how it is that machines can complement humans. And then if that's the case, and if those kinds of machines can be produced and deployed effectively, then humans are still going to be a very important ingredient into creativity, into doing complex tasks, into setting goals and setting aspirations.
So you don't see a point where we'll be able to replicate the human mind, if you like?
Never say never, but I don't think it's near. I think the news of the demise of the human mind are much exaggerated, and they're not going to become a reality anytime soon. So we better get used to lots of attempts by AI to replace human that backfire, and we should also be ready for those inspiring scientists, entrepreneurs, companies that find a different path to complement humans.
To what extent can people pursue education or training or retrain to ensure they're best placed to react to the shifts you're talking about?
At the end of the day, every major change will require us to make some adjustments. Humans are incredibly adaptable, but that adaptation sometimes takes time and sometimes takes effort. Living in small bands of 100 people roaming the jungle is very different than living in a society of 100 million people with centralized institutions. We make those adaptations. Living with industrial technology is going to be very different than living with agricultural technology, and adapting to AI is going to be different as well. But here, vision matters greatly again. If your vision is one in which AI will take over everything, our adaptation is how can we enjoy video games more? But if your vision is one in which AI can complement humans, then A, how do we get to that future? What is our contribution to get to that future? And B, what are the things that humans can do with the help of AI, with machines in the service of humans, that will really elevate humanity's great strengths? That's what I think we have to think about. And education is a very important role, but it's not just more college, postgraduate, let's send everybody to do an MBA or master's in communication or computing. People have different skills, different interests. How can we get people to become better electricians, plumbers, nurses, gardeners, depending on your skills, depending on your interests? And AI can help with many of these things, provided that we create the right AI tool.
Daron Acemoglu. Next up, we once again welcome David Card to the programme. David Card, we've heard from Daron there, but I wonder if you can tell us about the spark or sparks that led to your interest in the field.
Well, in my case, it's kind of accidental. I was a physics major in college, and in my third year, my girlfriend at the time was taking economics and asked me to help her with some of the formulas in the textbook. And I sort of started reading the textbook and found it very interesting. And at the same time, I think I was beginning to realize I was not going to be a world-leading physicist by any stretch. So I got kind of interested in economics and found a way to kind of weasel into an introductory class that was actually taught by the person who'd written this textbook. And so I came to it largely by accident.
It requires so much to rise to the top of any field. Economics is no different. Determination, talent, hard work. What would you say the most important ingredients have been in your quest?
I would say probably the most important thing for me was a combination of teachers, advisors, co-authors, and students. So in my case, as a result of my kind of late entry into economics, I had to sort of, the set of classes I could pursue were somewhat reduced as an undergraduate because I didn't have any prep for those classes. So I ended up taking a class in labor economics, which had no prerequisites. And I got interested in that topic partially because I had worked in various blue-collar jobs and partially because the instructor was a relatively young PhD. That person encouraged me to think about doing a PhD. I ended up going to Princeton where he had finished his PhD. with the same advisor. And so that was like a huge opportunity for me. And at the time, my advisor, whose name was Orly Ashenfelter, was probably the top person training people in my field. And Princeton was really the place where that was going on. So it was kind of by accident, but it was extremely helpful because the training program was rigorous and at the time kind of way ahead of where everybody else was. Then I got lucky. I got a relatively good job coming out of graduate school at Chicago, and I interacted with a couple of people that had really sort of furthered my education and increased my set of things that I could think about and do, and we wrote some papers that were well received. And that kind of thing has happened to me many, many times. So I think my own success is largely a result of these sequence of interactions with other people. In the last 20 years, much of my work has been done with younger people, including many of my former PhD students, but also people I run into or have come to visit my center at Berkeley or whatever. And that's a source of continuing inspiration and also new questions and new things to think about. So in my case, I think that it's more of I have sort of a personal approach to economics, and it's driven by the people that I run into.
Really interesting to hear that background of how people get to where they are. But I wonder what drives you to keep seeking out new expertise, and has that changed over time?
Usually I get interested in a topic or question, and sometimes that involves quite a bit of digging because I need to try and understand what's the current state of knowledge in that field. Why do I think there's something wrong with it? And, we could take some ideas maybe I've developed with some co-author or some potential co-author and make some kind of a contribution in that area. So, for example, some years ago, I kind of got interested in health issues revolving around C-section. So it's quite controversial. Some people think there's too many C-sections. Obviously, on the other side, C-section is a life-saving procedure, and before it was well understood how to do it and all the procedures that we have today, lots of mothers and babies would die in childbirth. So we sort of thought of a way to investigate whether there was too much or too little C-section, and were able to make a contribution. But in terms of doing that, I had to learn quite a bit about all of the huge literature on that topic, and also some of the medical aspects of birth that I didn't really know. And so it was a huge investment on my part. But then with that investment, I was able to get interested in some other aspects of the healthcare system, and that led to some further work in that area. So that's usually how things go for me. I kind of get interested in a question. Oftentimes it seems to me like what people are saying about a particular question is driven by some combination of ideology and voodoo rather than actual scientific evidence. And so I think, well, maybe we could contribute some evidence here and try and clear things up a little bit. And that's usually the reason why I do something.
Well, those insights are really interesting, talking about C-sections. It's not really, from what I can tell, related to labour force in one sense of the word.
Actually, there's sort of a strange fact, which is, so in the 1970s and 80s, when I got my PhD, labor economics became kind of a leading field and emerged as the benchmark field for using data to develop an answer, a question of like, is it really true that something causes something else? So fundamentally in social science, most people are aware of this idea that there's causal things and there's indirect correlations, and so separating correlation and causality. And my field really made a lot of progress in that area. And as a result of that, many, many people would come and work with me and my colleagues who were interested in health or education. So I've actually supervised people who are now leaders in those fields. But at the early stages of their work were, basically taking labor economics ideas and trying to translate them. So I've always been interested in that, and I indirectly know quite a bit about it. So that's really how it goes about. So they're not as far apart as you would think.
What about daily quotidian challenges? What are the biggest ones you face, David? And I wonder how have you set about overcoming them?
Well, I'm getting a little older, so I'm almost 70. It is I think that the keeping up with all of the new ideas and technology that exists is somewhat more challenging at my age. And also I'm interested in quite a large number of different topics. So I've always got 7 or 8 different projects running at the same time. And I probably would be better off trying to focus a little bit more on a smaller number of things and try and maybe push a little bit the technological frontier. So at this point in economics, applied economics, there is a very high barrier to fully understanding some of the statistical procedures and methods that people are proposing at the kind of state of the art. And so really understanding and being able to use those is somewhat challenging, and I find that challenging. It's great if you can finally figure out, okay, now I fully understand that and I feel like I could use it and contribute with it, but that's a bit of a challenge.
Perhaps finally, what's the most satisfying aspect of your craft? Is it about adding knowledge, finding these real-world applications for research, or, I don't know, perhaps something else?
I would say it's successfully creating a new PhD student. I've had about 130 PhD students, and every time that a PhD student works with an advisor, it's a multi-year process, and you learn a lot about some topic that they're working on. You learn a lot about them because there is many steps along the way, and it's almost always kind of a struggle at various points. So you develop this relationship with people, and so I have really friends all over the world that I think that's something that almost no one else has if you're not an academic, that you can have friends in every country in Europe practically, and a lot of Asian countries and South America, people that I know extremely well actually because we work so closely for this 3 to 4 year period. So I think that's a great aspect of my job. And I know there are academics, very successful academics, who don't really do that, but I think that's the most interesting aspect of the job myself.
David Card. And that brings us to the end of this special edition of the show here on Monocle Radio. Next time, we'll wrap up our summer series of Nobel Perspectives with Bengt Holmström. And don't forget, you can hear more from and find out more about all the Nobel laureates that UBS seeks inspiration from by heading to ubs.com/Nobel. And to listen again, including to those previous other Nobel Perspectives, and to discover more about Monocle's worldview, you can visit monocle.com. This is The Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. I'm Tom Edwards. Thanks for listening.